my dear wife always says I talk too much. My dear wife is right. My theory is that she does as well. As you notice, I haven't had time. You know, these journeys away from home are quite ridiculous. You just flick from thing to thing. So I don't quite see how I'm going to eat that and talk at the same time. It looks rather nice. I suppose I'll just have to drink. No. Yeah?
In as much as it's rather hot in here, it's rather crowded, I suggest that we open some windows back. They're all open,
I think we'll have to do a division of labour. I talk and you eat this, eh? What I'm going to talk about is really, again, let it be admitted, a talk I have in the boxes. It consists of four jobs, really. First one, and really the whole thing rotates surprising enough around people, and people in rather different situations, people of, let us say, different cultural backgrounds. Watch you, Michael. Oh, you want these sandwiches, do you? That's my son-in-law. I know him. Well, you can keep a bit from me. You do sometimes. You're not getting the beer. Yes, there are people in different cultural situations. There are also people of different cultural backgrounds, some of them mixed. I suppose I'll come a bit more into it as we go along. I could mention that you know, I've had an impulse to say a couple of words, which I think I will do, and that is that since I came here, you know, a few hours ago, or whenever, last night, I've been in Cambridge and I've looked a little bit in London. And it seems to be a matter of some concern that some of the architecture that seems to interest us a good deal doesn't seem to me to be frightfully involved in people, not in real people, but in symbolic people. You know, one could describe, it's all community planning and community building, housing and so on and so forth, some of it's workplaces. And you could describe a kind of dwelling which was big and very important and very expensive, and had the tendency to make people visiting it feel very small and unimportant, and only could feel a home to the people who lived there, and they were very important. And you would recognize straight away that I'd be describing a Renaissance palace. It can be beautiful as well. The funny thing is that quite a lot of places in the world, and in Britain as well, in England as well, you see exactly these buildings. You recognize them completely. The only thing that's rather confusing about them is that they're built with concrete and glass and steel and modern materials, and they have very modern shapes. The other thing is, of course, that which is curious, that they attract a lot of interest in a modern society which preaches humanistic ideals and so on and so forth. I think these buildings are, you know, pure Renaissance buildings or medieval buildings, and you know, the shapes and the materials can kid us, but they shouldn't, and that they're a very disturbing phenomenon, as I say, in a modern time. They're disturbing insofar that you think that they either don't represent the dreams of the society they're built in, or even more disturbing, that they might do so. In which case, we would come to the unfortunate conclusion, God, I'm preaching, aren't I? But, you know, I feel As I say, I've just been at one or two, and I won't name them. There's some not far from here. And that the main difference from the Renaissance, apart from the materials and the in-shapes, is that the Renaissance buildings were built in a time which really believed in this, the difference between the importance of certain people and the unimportance of the rest, whereas this age professes it doesn't, but builds it nonetheless. Well, now, I've said enough about all that. Let's cut the cackle and, I'll carry on cackling and look at some pictures. The first one will be plans, and you being architects like to see pictures of buildings, and I haven't got pictures of buildings of it. It's plans that we're doing for a little community up in the Canadian Arctic. And it touches straight away very typically on the type of situation I'm talking about, because it's a community that's being planned for different cultures. All these have this type of characteristics, as I say, for different cultures, but these two cultures in this case have also different races. And the two races are, well, there are probably more of them, but the two obvious ones are Eskimos and Euro-Canadians, they say in Canada. In Alaska, they say Caucasians, and you get the point. Then sooner or later, you find yourself saying white. But it's being planned for them, and it is being planned as an integrated community, and it gives a lot of problems. And what have we done about that? Let's look at the pictures. I have to do this myself, do I? Which is forward, which is backwards, and which is... Ha-ha! We've straight away got the two... Can you move the things over to the other apparatus just so that I feel at home? It doesn't make any difference to you, but it would make me feel more at home. It is Canada. It's a part of Canada that not many Canadians know very much about. And it's a hell of a long way north. Now, do you have a stick or some non-technical apparatus for pointing at things? Yeah, good. My hand shakes too much for these little lit-up arrows. This is the place... God, I'm caught. Anybody coming? This is the place, and this is what the region looks like. This is actually a wangle. It's a place a bit further over, which is here. The place has a name, which is Resolute Bay. It is in the Canadian Arctic, and it is a long way up in the north. I moved from Britain over to Sweden, and I felt I was going north. When I've been to the north of Sweden, I felt I was going even further north. And where I live in Sweden's here, that's Stockholm, and when I went north, it was up here, and we've done some building there. This place, Resolute Bay, is there. It's about the south point of Spitsberg, and it's about Thule in Canada. It's a small community which I'll tell you about. There's an existing community of sorts there. It's in this area of known as the Northwest Territories, which isn't a province of Canada, but this is an administrative thing. I won't bother you. Canada being about here. Is that the right one? Any Canadians here? I'm not sure it's that line, or it must be a bit further south. And this is where Canadians live. Then there are a few up here. This is, of course, Alaska. There are so few that I can tell you that the size of this area, the Northwest Territories, is Europe and probably a bit more, and the total population is 35,000 people. Introduces one factor of importance, and that is isolation. This has an influence on people and their feelings and their experiences. The other thing, of course, is climate. I'll come back to that. And in a bit further west, it's rather beautiful like this. Well, you or some... Yeah, can you do it there? Okay, swap them. And this is the way people lived, the Eskimos, and that is the way they worked, hunting largely sea animals, also land animals. These could be considered as interesting romantic dwellings, but they're very bad ones. Even igloos are pretty poor dwellings for living in. They are fantastically ingenious in their technique, but they have certain disadvantages as compared with modern dwellings. Amongst other things, they melt in the summer. And you have to, I've lived in them, I've moved about in the Swedish north and lived in them. You have to keep them below freezing point and so on and so forth. And here's a bit of modern technology on the top. Next. But, you know, a very, very advanced culture the Eskimos had for living in this fantastically extreme situation. Grease Fjord, still a little bit to the west. This is a small hunting community, still surviving on hunting. Most of the Arctic lives on various forms of social payments. The population has increased beyond the point usually where people can support themselves entirely on hunting, and at the same time maintain something of the standard of living that they have also learned to appreciate just like us. This is Grease Fjord, a very rich throwaway community. They don't eat or use all of the animals that they hunt and kill. They just take the best bits and leave the rest to rot finally. The dogs don't even eat it. Well organized, the row of houses, the row of store sheds, the ski-doos and the boats along the shore, larger stores behind. And in the next pictures, next two, you will see the way you come there, which is by aeroplane. These twin otters, short landing strip, and you come when they happen to go, and of course then everybody turns out. Here are local inhabitants of two of the cultural groups that I mentioned. Teacher, he's a South Canadian, and the mechanic and the women here and the children are Eskimos. Here they're still Eskimos, largely in Greenland. Of course, they're largely mixed race. And as you see, it is a desert situation. This is in the summer. There is no snow on the ground because very little snow falls. At Grease Fjord, where they have pretty good weather, very little wind, the result is that the sea is frozen most of the year. The year I was there, it was only open 2 days, only free of ice 2 days. Next. This is all just a bit of the background of Resolute Bay. Now, on these two pictures, I'll just tell you one or two things about the climate. The one to the right, to your right, shows you the Eskimo village at Resolute Bay, midday in the winter. Now, the position there is you're so far north that the sun is below the horizon for 2.5 months, and for about a month there is no light whatsoever in the sky, other than, of course, moonlight, stars, northern lights. All of these very beautiful. You enjoy them, and that's when, in Spitsbergen in the north, you go out skiing or whatever. The summer, for some reason that I don't quite understand, but it's very fortunately arranged, you get about 3.5 months with the sun above the horizon, 2.5 months with the sun below, 3.5 months with the sun above. I discovered this first in North Norway. I haven't tried hard, but I've never really found out why the difference. But obviously it's better to live at the North Pole than at the South Pole for some reason. Temperatures, winter temperatures, the lowest recorded was, if I remember rightly, 63 Fahrenheit below. And the average summer temperature, something round about 5 degrees or 10 degrees Fahrenheit below freezing point. An unfortunate climate also in the winter, when there is no sun in the skies are clear. In the summer, when the sun is up the whole time, you get fog and clouds. This, for anybody who knows snow, will indicate you get wind, and you get a lot of wind. They get about 3 days a year when there is no wind whatsoever, and they get pretty high storms. This is a photo taken of a guy taking temperature, wind, and humidity measurements on one of the sites we were looking at. The light is from a bombardier, one of these snowmobiles. Now, there's just one more thing about this picture that I'd like to say, which is important to remember, and that is that the gentleman is clothed for Arctic conditions, and the Canadian clothing for the Arctic, or for the subarctic, is really excellent. In other words, the initial protection clothing, then after that you have buildings and things like that, buildings being an extension of clothing. The initial protection clothing is excellent, and this makes it quite possible to move around outdoors under pretty tough weather conditions. There are weather conditions when you don't go out, but most of the time you can go out and really it is not too bad. Next two pictures show Resolute Bay. As you see, not as mountainous as the ones I showed you before. The high Arctic gets just flatter and flatter as you go westward. There is a mountain there at Resolute Bay. That's this one, known as Signal Hill. This is Resolute Bay itself. It's taken in June, if I remember rightly, the end of June. There is ice there. There's always ice on the sea. You get a south wind and it blows into the bay and blocks it. This is a road going to the Eskimo village. Ruin Lake, so called because there were ruins of Eskimo settlements there, dated about 600 years ago. And further up here you get an air base. And this is the ground. Well, you'll see there's no snow on the ground, which may surprise people for a position that high in the Arctic. But the reason for that is that this is a desert situation. Anybody who's flown over Morocco recognizes this. It looks very similar. It's a desert situation. You get desert when you have about something under, I think it's 250 millimeters of precipitation a year. Here you get about 140. So there is very little snow, and the little warmth in the summer is sufficient to melt it off. On the other hand, you get a lot of problem with snow drifting, because the little snow that exists is just blown along by this continuous wind, keeps moving till it hits a block, a boulder, or a mountain, or, of course, a building. And you're drifted in, and it packs, well, I was going to say as hard as concrete, but not quite. You can drive over it without causing any greater marks. So there's considerable problem there. There is vegetation. In parts, there's enough vegetation to support musk oxes and reindeers. This sounds like a kind of travel story, doesn't it? Here you see flowers. There are some there, and there are probably some over here somewhere. And that's all we get on our site in the whole of this part of Cornwallis Island. There is part in the centre, as I say, where you get a certain amount of grass and moss, sufficient to support the animals. They've even tried growing potatoes here. They did not get very big, but they could grow them. And one of the chief problems is, one of the problems, of course, is the climate. The other is the lack of nutrition in the soil. It's all broken down by frost and not by chemical action. On the other hand, you will find fossil corals, belemnites, shells here. It has been hot, and that's why they're looking for oil. Next. Well, both of them, yeah. Break down in there. This is a picture of the air base. And the reason for Resolute Bay is the air base, so to speak. Originally it wasn't. The kind of thing that happens, we've got a very bad site from every reason. Even in terms of the Arctic, it's very bad. The climate is worse there than it is further north, for example. And, this is one of the things that I could talk about. But they decided after the war to get meteorological information for good reasons and bad, for transatlantic shipping and flying, and of course for military reasons and so on. They decided to establish a meteorological station on Devon Island. They were blocked by sea ice. The captain of the ship said, "We've got to go back, otherwise we're caught," the whole of the winter. They radioed down to Ottawa and got instructions to the captain, stay 36 hours, put the stuff ashore wherever you can, and they got a hut and 4 or 5 meteorologists ashore at Resolute Bay. Well, then your first reaction is a romantic one to it, you know, where are the polar bears and so on. The next one is a further romantic one. You start designing houses, and the first ones I designed and built were log cabins, and they were pretty romantic. And after a certain time, you realize this is an insufficient method of working, and you have to start analyzing the situation, what it's really about. And there you get climate in, you will get isolation, so on and so forth. But you realize another thing, which is very important the whole way through, and starts making links to Newcastle on Tyne, which I'm going to show pictures of, or to Swedish schemes I'm going to show pictures of, that the technical problems you can cope with. Permafrost, there are ways of building houses on ice. This can be done. You just keep the stuff cold instead of trying to keep it warm. The cold climate, you can do something about. You know, the first thing and the most important thing perhaps is clothing. They've done that. And then the buildings. And you can heat insulate them well, and you don't need to waste too much energy and so on and so forth. The snow drifting is more of a problem. If you want comfort and less wind, you will tend to get snow deposit. There are things you can do about that. And you won't solve the problems, but you can analyze them, you can establish what they are, and you can also analyze and establish more or less what you can do about it. The difficult things are the human situations and the human relationships and the human reactions. They are the difficult things in the north. Now, the problem is we're moving into the north or into the new age. This seems to me to touch on my little, suddenly it strikes me, touch on my little introduction about Renaissance building with modern materials. It ain't too difficult to learn how to build concrete and glass buildings. It is much more difficult to learn how to build for the new society. Well, I felt after living a time in Sweden that the only hope was that one became indigenous in the situation. You could take all this physical situation for granted, and it became just part of you. And then you could start thinking about the human situation. And then, once doing that, you would certainly not do what nearly every southerner does. Coming up, southern technician, architect, sooner or later they throw up a proposal for a dome town. You put a dome over the whole damn lot and you get a Mediterranean climate inside. If you start checking with people who've lived in the north, with doctors, with sociologists, psychologists and so on, their experiences in the dew line and so on, you will then discover that is exactly what you do not do. Human beings cannot live satisfactorily out of contact with their surrounding environment. As I say, you've got the clothing for it. These are just one or two pictures showing part of the reason why I looked at the map, suggested that site, made certain tests, and it was proved to be the right site. This is the way we travel in the Swedish north. This is a Swedish north. It looks similar to the Arctic. It's not equally tough. Next two pictures, that's with dog sled. Next two pictures, upside down. This is traveling with a dog sled. The other one's disappeared. We don't worry about it. Yes, we do. This is the kind of landscape we travel in, and as you see, this is, to use the Resolute terminology, in the banana belt. When they're going down to Hudson Bay, above the tree line, somebody says they're going there. Yes, so you are going to the banana belt, they say. So this is the banana belt. You can live very well in it. Next one, on this side, keep that one. Now, what we did, the final choice after the discussions was for two of the sites. One was near this original site that the others, the engineers firm, contractor firm had opted for. The other one was below the mountain. They were not certain which one. So we tested both sites. We didn't make a decision. Now this is one of the ways of testing. You have a water tank like that. The water flows through. You can regulate the speed of the water. You sift in fine sand here. You have a model of your building or your town here. It can be rotated so you get the effect of different wind directions. And this is the picture you get. And that is a pretty good simulation of snow drifting. You can measure the depth of the snow drifts and everything. this is a section of the town plan that we came up with that we're testing there. We're going to test the buildings in larger scale as we design those. Now the other thing, of course, if you know about snow and so on, is this will also tell you how wind's behaving, since it's wind that forms the drifts. And they're talking to an aerodynamic expert in Stockholm, who he partook in the scheme of these, developing these high-performance jets they have. And I was asking him about this and getting him involved in certain tests. And he asked me, he said, do you travel in the mountains in the winter? I said, yeah. He said, well, you'll learn more there than you'll learn in a wind tunnel. But your wind tunnel will be useful to check with it. So that was that. Next two. Well, the other two methods of testing I'll mention before I talk about these. The other two methods of testing, the one was a mathematical calculation. You had weather information from the airbase over a 10-year period. You had no detailed microclimate information about the two sites. But you can symbolize geometrically the terrain configuration of the sites, and mathematically you can say, calculate that if the weather is like that in the airbase, it will be like that on the sites. That was done in Toronto, gave us information which, as we checked later, seemed correct. And then we tested on the two sites. You remember the gentleman who was taking weather measurements? He was testing on one of the sites. We tested, measured wind, humidity, temperature, and so on. And that came out to advantage the whole time. All these came out to the advantage of the hill site. The highest temperature difference we got, but that was only one day, was 15 degrees Fahrenheit difference between the site behind the hill and the open site. Now, there's one more thing we did, and that is we built models of the town. It's very easy to build models of the town in about that height in the Arctic, because the whole of the Arctic is littered with empty oil drums, and you just build your town with empty oil drums, and then you go and study the drifting on site. Well, then we made 6 different schemes for the structure of the township, and took them up and asked people about them in the way I mentioned before. These are 2 of them. And when telling about these models, the one thing, of course, is that you say, both to Eskimos and whites, this is the town seen from the air in the winter, and they say, oh, yes. They've all been in aeroplanes. Their town is white nearly all the time. And, you know, as they talked on, the Eskimos, when they got really involved, I stopped them translating. And I knew more or less the trend of what they were talking about. You could understand they were having very detailed discussions about these plans by the way they pointed. You don't need to get everything translated. You know, they were pointing up here, for example. Was this the best part of town, or what about here? You can get out to the hunting grounds, or what about if you're here, and how you're going to get in with your seals, and so on and so forth. And then they were doing these kind of things there, and then there and there, or you know, here and here and here, and then they went like that all over the shop, you know, there, 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 there. And you know, this was the distribution of Eskimos and whites, and so on and so forth. Well, so all I told them about this was that these were one-family houses, these were flats, row houses and hotel, and here was the centre. Now I wonder if it's at this point, yeah, why not do it now, that I mentioned the question of one-family houses, villas, whatever you like to call it, suburbia in the Arctic. Now I've always preached that, well, since I really started thinking seriously about this, that in the subarctic, you do not over-exaggerate the importance of climate, because there are other human factors which are more important. You will not build towns under domes. You will not build total environment. You will arrange protected, wind-protected, or weather-protected possibly indoor connections, and weather-protected outdoor ones which are sunny, somewhat wind-protected, and shorter than the indoor ones. You know, you will have ski runs, bobsleigh runs, ice areas and so on, everything to encourage people out. You will have light in the dark period of the year. But I always imagined and tend to say that possibly in the high Arctic you might start linking everything together. Well, I discovered that just in the high Arctic you don't do that. And again, this is this thing that the human needs, the human problems, whatever you like to call it, can very definitely override what seems to be the obvious technical solution. Everybody was interested in integration. I was also obviously interested in that. Case in point, I discussed in Frobisher Bay with a social worker. He was an East Indian, that is the Canadian picture. He said, "Are you interested in integration?" "Yes, indeed, we are." "Don't pack them too tight in that case." "Well, why?" There are different cultural behaviors, different backgrounds. One knows this one, that Eskimos, for example, are up all night in the summer. They drive around with ski-doos. They shout, kids play, and so on and so forth. They slaughter their seals where it is convenient to slaughter them. You can get a southerner coming up extremely keen to integrate, to live together with the Eskimos, and so on and so forth. He has one rhythm of life. You'll probably recognize this. You live in London. My daughters did. They observed Englishmen and West Indians. They have different patterns of behavior, and they are packed too tight, and it leads to friction. The southerner comes up. His life rhythm as a southerner, not as a white man. The North Scandinavian will behave like the Eskimos. They're up all night. But he is a southerner. He will go to bed at the usual time, try and sleep, try and look after the job during the day, and so on and so forth. He is woken up again, he's woken up again. This goes on for 2 months, and after that he starts talking about the bloody Eskimos, and they're feckless, and they have a ridiculous way of living, and so on and so forth. You know, the Englishman likes to mow his lawn and go to bed at some time. The West Indian likes a party. And, you know, sooner or later, if they're too near together, you know, and the West Indian is less tidy than the Englishman used to be. Now they're all equally less tidy. But sooner or later it gets linked back to race and so on and so forth. Look at these West Indians, look at these Englishmen. The Englishmen are born, the West Indians, they're feckless. So, one family housing in the high Arctic. Costs more, more heat loss, movement outdoors, doubtful whether that's bad, but that's what we're suggesting, what we're already doing. This would be more important to talk about if you anticipated working in the high Arctic, but I think the same thing applies to, in other terms, to southern situations. Now this plan had one chief characteristic, which I didn't talk about, that it made one community. It also gives wind protection. This was designed to lie below the hill. You get initial wind protection and snow precipitation, snow deposits behind the hill. It acts as a snow fence. You'll get further wind protection from the perimeter building. This protection will stretch in 30 times the building's height into the township from the different wind directions. Snow drifting is such that it's not like a sandstorm. The snow doesn't go high in the air. It keeps about the height of this room. And if your building happens to be 3 or 4 stories high, we imagine, this hasn't been tested or proved, but we tested in a tunnel, it will tend to deflect, and the snow will tend to deflect and be led outside. Some will come in. You will get snow drifting inside. The whole thing does not give total protection. I'm always having to warn for that. People expect a paradise if you talk the wrong way. This gives partial improvement. When I showed that plan, I showed that plan, and there the higher buildings are arranged in a different way. Now, the only thing I said about that was that you got more effective protection as you reduce this distance, and everybody was living a bit nearer the center. Next to, this is one where the central functions, you know, the thing everybody goes to, shop, school, etc., was in the geographical center. You haven't built here because that's the north side, and you are very interested in the sun when it returns after the dark period, and it's very low on the horizon. That would be shadowed. And then, again, more variety and experience of the township. Now, this was another one, and that has snowdrift reasons. I won't talk about that for the moment. I'll just say that this one and the previous one over there were rejected immediately by everybody. Eskimos, whites, young, old, long hair, short hair. Everybody rejected this, and this interests me, and I said, why? I said, well, all this, obviously, yes, possibly more protection, but you know what will... It turned out this is the best side, it's to the south, it's towards the view, and that will be Snob Hill. You got out into the wind, and, you know, the slopes were wrong for the sun, and so on and so forth. We move it to the west, they said. So we moved it to the west, you know, and this is a very important part of participation. It didn't make an enormous difference, but what happened was that we got there to the site. We can take the next two pictures, I think. And if you're clever, you are clever. You've moved them together. You haven't quite got them the right height, exactly, and that is the whole of our site. And, of course, we drove out onto the site with, you know, you drive out in dollar grins, with all the wives and the kids and the grandmas and the granddads and everything. And you stand around, you look at the site, and everybody discusses it. You know, you can't do that in London. London's too big, but you can do it in Resolute Bay. Oh, I haven't mentioned Resolute Bay, about 200 Eskimos, which includes all the children, and varying in the winter about 400 Southerners, and in the summer about 600, varying. It may go up a bit. And they look at it, and straight away it came. You haven't moved the township to the west. Yes, we have. Oh, no, you haven't. Well, we got our town marked out. You know, these throwaway oil drums all the way around there. That's the town. This is the centre. This is also the model of the township. And we got certain main setting out lines related to the lake. We could show that we had moved the town to the west. Restoration of confidence. Lack of confidence if we hadn't done it. Well, now, the Eskimos have moved there. The villagers moved up there. You know, Canadians move houses around all over the shop. And they do it on a three-wheel trailer with the people in it. There's now an Eskimo village here, and we're starting this summer to build new houses there. The old Eskimo houses, they're going to be upgraded. No difference in qualities between Eskimo housing and white housing. Absolutely fundamental if you want integration. You know, it just won't work. They tried that in Aklavik. The white housing had better qualities, had main drainage and so on. The Eskimos didn't. Conflicts. They're not trying that again. So they're living there, and I got there, I was there a month or so ago, and asked how did it go, and what about the wind and so on. Oh yes, they said, much better wind protection than other places. I doubt whether that's true. I think it's somewhat better. And what about the lake? Oh, no problem. Well, what about the kids? Oh, no problem. We could keep an eye on them when they were there. And do they use it much? Oh yes, look at them. They're down there the whole time. Well, perhaps the town would have been better in the original position. Yeah, sure, it would have been. But I think still damned important, if you're talking about participation, you have to be serious about it, and you don't kid people. Next. Plan of the township, well, this is half of it. It goes on here. The centre, hotel, apartments there, certain terrace houses, and the houses in the middle. The houses arranged in small villages of about 15 to 20 houses, with their own little play places. This means, of course, ice, snow, boulders, and so on. A central area here with school, the village, the church, which has moved up, health centre, and so on and so forth. Looking at this, the hotel, we want a continuous building there, not for architectural reasons, but because if you make a hole in it, the wind will come zooming through. It's the same thing with sound, touching on Byker, Newcastle on Tyne. So it has to be continuous. You don't know how big the hotel's going to be, and it might want to grow in the future. The structure is such that hotel can grow into houses, and you can go on building houses further on. Or if the hotel becomes smaller, they can be turned back into flats for a small sum of money. Now the other thing is, you will discern here an internal walkway around the lot. Now all the northerners were pretty doubtful about that internal walkway. And you know why? Again, social loading. Children will tend to play indoors and not go out, etc., etc. The people up here will get a lot of people passing by. They suggested taking that away. I suggest that we have doors there, possibly heavy doors, and there will be locks in the doors, and people themselves can decide whether they want to use that communication or not. But we'll see. Maybe we'll take it away. That's up to them. Then there are lots of exits. There are groups of flats, about 12 flats around a little common space. You come out of the flats towards the interior. You can go down, and then you get into a basement where you can park cars and ski-doos and so on. You come out towards the centre part, the protected side. The exits already point direction up towards the centre, and then sunk into the bottom of the building here is an open air but protected, a kind of arcade, which will give you better wind protection, will give you sun when it's in this direction, and will give an improved climatic situation, microclimate situation as you move towards the centre. Encouragement for people to move outdoors. That is the site with its slope and the views and so on. Next. Centre seems to me quite fantastic. It's a programme that I don't think has been carefully worked out, and I doubt whether we'll ever get built, but they tell me we will. You know, 800, max 1,000 people in the summer, less in the winter. 2 stores, one is the Hudson Bay, the other is the Eskimo Cooperative, 6 small shops and small workshops, the hotel with its restaurant, the library, that's the school library in the centre, open front, at the town park, vegetation indoors, vegetation important experience for human beings and for kids, especially for southerners, but also for Eskimos, has to be indoors with improved microclimate here that we'll get, wind protection and sun reflection from the buildings. If we introduce nourishment, for example from sewage and so on, we will probably get a little vegetation here. Possible future swimming pool. The school gymnasium and assembly hall can be opened together, obviously for public use, dual use. This gives a room where the whole of the township can meet and discuss common things of common interest or have a Christmas party. Below, multi-purpose, so-called, skittle alley, ping pong, billiards, club rooms and so on. And then also, in this plan it was placed outside, now it's moved in, ice hockey rink and curling alley. A very, very high degree of equipment for a township. But obviously the argument is good. This is an isolated community. You can't go anywhere else to play billiards. It has to have the equipment. But whether we will get the finance for it, that is still a doubtful point. Next. This is a sketch of a later plan. And, well, you can see that the ice hockey and the curling have moved in. There are good reasons for that. This, if it gets built, I've suggested it's built straight away and used as a workshop for the actual building process. But perhaps the more important thing is the school. The school in the previous scheme was out here, and discussion with the school people, there's a typical problem there, which is an exaggerated variant of a problem in Europe, for example, and that is that the old people, the old Eskimos, it applies to Greenland as well, have no school experience. They have no school training. They have, obviously, the training in their tradition and a very efficient schooling in their way of life. But in the new technology and the new world and abstract thinking, which is very important, they have very little training. And the kids go to school, they learn quite a lot of this, and the parents know nothing really of what is happening, and you get alienation between, exaggerated alienation between parents and kids. The suggestion was move the school in, make an open front school, and do everything to attract the older people into the school as well. That's a section of it, as you see, lifted off the ground. One of the stores, the multi-purpose, the town park. The swimming pool probably will never come. It might. Our north has a lot of swimming pools. That's the only chance of learning to swim is usually indoors or for a very short period outdoors. Next. Sketch of the town, an early one, that's all changed. House type, octagonal Y, it's a cheap cylinder. A cylinder will accumulate, it's a fairly good aerodynamic form for varying wind directions. It will collect very little snow behind it. But a cylinder is expensive to build, an octagon is cheaper. Smaller lower floor, and you will get a cylinder with a top plate, and you get even better aerodynamic performance. So you will get less snow accumulating in the town. Now, the reason for that is not only the entrances, we've also got double entrances. I thought of this is what you do on igloos. If one of your entrance gets blocks, igloo material snow is such you just cut a hole the other side, you make a new entrance there. You can finish off with 2 or 3 of them. We build in straight away 2 entrances. If the wind's blowing from here, that will get packed in with snow, but you can get out there. And later on, when you want to, you can shovel out that one, or vice versa. Also, you go in, there's a good roomy storage space, important for the Eskimos who have hunting equipment, important for the southerners who, if they are going to, they said this to me, that if we are going to live in the north and like it there, we've got to get all our junk, both reasonable and unreasonable junk, with us, the familiar things. then also everybody buys food bulk down south, because all food in the north is so expensive. They buy it once or twice a year and get it sent up by the sea lift. Final thing, this is what Eskimos do. You go in and you go up to your dwelling, and then you get the cold air. Obviously is heavy, it doesn't go up into your dwelling. Eskimos do that, they arrange their entrance like that. You get a kind of airlock of the same type as a water trap, an air trap, cold air trap. Wets here, staircase there, and different possibilities for plans. Okay, next two. Can be built with sticks, can be built with panel prefabrication, can be built with volume elements, or whatever you call it, trailer units they say there. A rectangular unit and a unit shaped like that. In the rectangular unit you're wets, and then you add another one, you get a house that side. You put two central ones and you get a house that side. These plans, these structures give you, which we've studied here, a large variety of plan dispositions which people can choose themselves. You build the house according to their requirements, or you build the carcass and they build the rest themselves. One of the things I will mention is that one of the plans was a very open plan. And I thought of the traditional Eskimo way of life, which is extended family, everybody together. I learnt there, and I learnt it later, it's the same thing in Canada, that this plan might be acceptable for Southerners, and especially younger Southerners, was certainly not acceptable for Eskimos. Why? Because Eskimo children are fighting for independence from parental authority in the same way as white children. Western children have done it already and partly achieved it. So they were not interested in that type of plan. The other thing was that we had plans where you had a main dwelling and you had a small dwelling which could be either linked or cut off. It could be for the grandparents. Eskimos look after their grandparents themselves, and they could live beside, or the whites could have their teenage youngsters there. And, you know, if you're friends, you have the door open. If you're not friends, you close it. If you're enemies, you put a cupboard against it. This is the house, as you see, lifted off the ground. That is protecting the cold ground so that it doesn't get heated. Next picture will show two models of it. Here again, this is a trick which actually is a bit of an exaggeration. I have done it in Sweden. It does work. The return of the sun after the dark period of the winter is important. You know, these funny Scandinavians sitting in the spring with their faces up to the sun. They aren't funny Scandinavians, they're just human beings who are used to living in that situation. The sun comes back, it feels warm, and this is joy. And, you know, it's the swing of the seasons. And this applies to all northerners. In Canada, in, for example, Jakobshamn, they go up on the top of the hill and they have a terrific party there the day the sun comes over the horizon. That low sun you can pick up and you can reflect it into your building in that type of a way. The building might be shadowed by another building to the south of it. These I can just mention. They are a way of getting ventilation into the air into the building without getting all the snow coming as well. It's a kind of snow trap. And there is one of the double entrances. Next. The same thing, a single story with similar structural elements, and a one-story house used as a temporary classroom. We're building these. Can also be used as a temporary shop and so on and so forth. You don't have to do special investment in a classroom function or in a shop function. The shop might not survive. You can get your shop nonetheless because you're not using special finance for it, and if it turns out the shop doesn't survive, you just put in the extra walls and there is your house and it becomes dwelling. And that is your dwelling. And this is the way of building on the permafrost, on a gravel pad. Next. Two photos of that. And again, similar structure. And I can mention just when these are here, I'm just about to show the upgraded houses. This is a very important part of the operation here, and they will look very similar. Next. Am I blocking for people here the whole time? Now, these are existing Eskimo houses, and they're not too bad, but they are certainly not particularly good. And you know, one could be scared stiff of the thought that whites got new houses, Eskimos got old Eskimo houses. One could realize it could be difficult to get southerners, whites, to move into these Eskimo houses because they're really not good enough. It's, you know, the aftermath of not quite good enough policy. On the other hand, when I first got there, they said, quite a number of people in the Yellowknife said, let's throw away these old houses, they're not frightfully good. Well, this hurts me, since I've learnt, you know, a long time back that throwaway economy is not a good thing. And especially in the Arctic, it is not a good thing because everything is enormously expensive in the Arctic, the transport costs, right? So to throw away 40-odd houses seemed real bad. Same time, one was worried of two things. Obviously, we got to establish the principle. You upgrade the houses so that they get the same technical qualities as the new houses. And if you do that well enough, you might find a mixture of whites and Eskimos in them. But then they can have an obvious visual difference. And there can be stigma there, you know, all this problem in this country with council house and housing for sale. Well, these were the plans we did. There is the old house. Very little alteration in it. We take away a couple of walls, the existing heating system. We add insulation around the whole lot, treble glazing, and add bedrooms, storage space, double entrance, and so on. And there is your house with both similar performance characteristics and similar appearance to the new houses we're going to build next to. And this is the other way of doing it, which Canadians rather like. You take the old house, you lift it up in the air, you build a new floor underneath it. And that is your old house, and again, dotted are the walls we've taken away, and there are one or two more walls in. The new floor below, again with double entrance and so on, and it finishes up in a house like that. And I found this very satisfactory because I'd always been scared, amongst other things, of aesthetic reasons, if you like, you know, that these are not very beautiful houses. I've always been scared of what was going to happen as we got these old houses up, and whether they'd always be looked upon as second-rate dwellings. Having done this, I felt that there was, for me, and hopefully for people themselves, these were just as good and just as pleasant houses as any new ones we could do. So that, I think, is the finish of Resolute Bay. Now, I'm going to cut out a whole batch of stuff because of time. Somebody said to me that sometime you have a break. Is this true, or is this wrong? How the hell would you engineer a break? I don't need a break, but, you know, what about other people? No?
Are you 70 Fahrenheit inside?
Oh, Jesus, Fahrenheit. Well, you're meant to be on the other ball, aren't you? The Canadians would be running, I imagine, you know, I can't actually answer you, but I'd imagine they'd be running about 23 Celsius indoors. And probably more. Now, another of the problem in the Eskimo houses, you know, in Sweden you're running at about 22, 23, yeah? And this is typical of the North. When you've defeated one of your traditional enemies, the cold, you really go to town with it. You know, the same way as with air conditioning in the tropics. You overchill, in the North you overheat. And the Northerners always, you know, it surprised me when I first got to Sweden, travelled in the North, and you sat in these terrifically heated trains and saw, you know, Northerners coming in laps and Swedes coming in with all their furs on and keeping them on, you know. And I was born and bred on, you know, this business of fresh air and exercise, and it isn't a draft, it's fresh air. So those are the kind of temperatures. But then you've got a further problem. The Eskimo cookery is such, you know, that they do a lot of boiling of food, and then they boil their clothes and so on, and you get a terrifically high humidity, you get enormous condensation, you arrange your ventilation, but it's not well arranged, so it gives drafts, and drafts there are really, you know, they're like small swords that come in through the ventilators. So they glue those up, you know, and the whole thing is dripping. So these ventilators I showed, they're a pretty important part of it. Any other questions? What about? Sorry?
Waste disposal.
Waste disposal. Yeah, it's landfill. They just chuck the stuff out of the place and then they put earth over it in the summer. You know, they can move about that. About that depth of the surface thaws out in the summer, and then they can move it around. There is no, I could mention this, there is no efficient technology in the north, and there won't be, this will be, the main part of the town will be totally conventional technology, which seems absolutely nuts. You saw these utilidors. They are unbelievably expensive, you know, and you've got these umbilical cords going all over the shop. and they're a nuisance and they cost money like hell. There can be an advantage. You can walk on them, you know, in the spring period when the ground is pretty loose. I was tempted to tell a story, Rosika. You know, different cultures, which I'll get into it later. This includes working class and middle class in England, for example. These are two different cultures, subcultures. Huh? They have different ways of thinking, and it's, you know, the one belonging to the one, especially the more dominating one, always thinks that they are wisest. Rosika, who's a dentist who lived in Aklavik, he tells a story about the straight line reasoning, which is very difficult to beat. And it's a story, but it's a nice story. The Eskimo watches the white man building sidewalks of wood. And the Eskimo looks at it and says, "The white man is very wise. Those sidewalks will keep our moccasins dry in the summer, and there'll be lots of lovely firewood in the winter." That's a story which proves nothing. But any other questions about Resolute? Oh, yeah, I was talking about the technology. It is nuts. It is obvious that, I told you, 3 still days a year. Would you use wind power for generation of electricity, or would you not? Obviously the answer is you would not. You have enormous great diesels thundering away, and when 2 years ago the oil ran up, you flew up new oil. Huh? Would you use composting toilets? No, you wouldn't. You have all the conventional sewage system, and also because of the ecologists, you have high-grade cleaning, sewage purification, and so on and so forth. It goes the whole time. Heating, as I tell you, they have poor insulation, double glazing, and walk straight into the room, and every time you walk into the room, of course, all the heat roars out and all the cold roars in, and so on and so forth. Well, the latter things we can do something about. The other things we can't, and there are reasons for it. We have, obviously, you know, if you could get the self-contained, self-functioning house, which, you know, they're trying here in this country, in most countries, it would be a wonderful thing. You know, you'd slip all this junk, expensive junk that you have to build there, which is not decorative either. But there are problems with it. Composting toilets, they've tried it. You know, they've taken European, they have their own, Swedish ones and others. And they use them quite a bit in Sweden in weekend cottages, and they work quite well, but it's always used by people who are interested in them. When they try using them for communities with people who want just to operate them, they break down because you're overloading them or underloading them, etc., etc. So what we've suggested and I'm pushing hard with is that we should have an experimental village. It seems totally unreasonable that every time you build a building or a township, you start from scratch. There are new ideas around, but they've never been tested out with prototypes. We should have our prototype village, which would include, you know, these different soft technology methods, and also would include social experiments. Any other questions about Resolute?
How was it there that you proposed the zone where you'd have no planning whatsoever, and where...
No, that was an earlier thought, earlier on. But it does touch on a problem here, you know, which we have. That again, this is another of these, so to speak, well-planned communities. And I have talked about this as part of at least experimental, but we've already had it up. You know, how much we have an enthusiast there who's looking after this plan and didn't allow the old Eskimo cooperative to be put in the village because it was an ugly building. You know, and it was an odd job lot of stuff. It wasn't even well run. But I was up there and talked to the Eskimos, and they wanted their co-op in the centre, and this seems the obvious place for it. I said, come in. The comment is right. The comment is that we've so far done very little about it, but we haven't yet got far with the town. We've moved the village, and we're going to start doing it next summer. But that should be in. Then the next thing is, you know, how many people will build themselves. But that was an earlier thought I have, and it's a thought I'm still pushing in this. Huh?
You commented that some authority had actually accepted the idea and was putting it into effect a few years ago.
No, I don't think I said that. But, you know, the whole of this is opening up. And you are, you know, as here in Denmark and Sweden and other places, you are getting people to a considerable degree involved. We're working on a scheme north of Stockholm where we're hoping to get it really going. Of course, I think one has to realize in this as a commentary that it is by no means everybody in a modern community who wants to do this. Other people, have other interests and other claims on their time and so on. They want key finished or whatever the term is. They want the complete thing. Others choose houses by going around and looking at different houses and saying, we'll take that one. But that obviously there is an enormous need for this, yes. But I don't really know of any case where they have done this thing of completely relaxing the controls, which is, except, of course, in the squatter settlements around the world. You've probably read in the AD, I met recently Richard Martin, who's working in Lusaka. And that is very, very interesting. And that is very applicable to Stockholm. And that I'm trying to work into a scheme now. But no, as far as I know, well, there may be bits. Pardon? Yeah, possibly there. Oh, I'm sure it. Other places like that. But those Lusaka operation is very fascinating indeed. And there are others of the same type. The Barriadas and so on. But the Lusaka one is interesting because Richard Martin, he's moved in, he's just doing kind of supporting action there the whole time. But one of the things he finds, of course, is, and it's rather like moving the township, that one of the demands that people are having in their do-it-themselves is to have conventional suburban houses. And this disturbs him, because he knows, and some of the Africans know, that their traditional houses are better, ecologically better, and better heat insulated and so on and so forth. But they, it's part of belonging. You eat French fried all over the world. There are other ways of doing potatoes. When the Beatles did it, everybody else did it, huh? And so on and so forth. So this also happens. Question number one, how long it's taken me. I think we've been at it about 3 years. Question number two.
Are you subjected to any statutory planning control in doing the township?
Oh, yes. There are the obvious ones like fire and so on and so forth. And then there are the types Parker Morris and so on and so forth as well.
I was thinking about the control that you are affected by doing things in a very established urban situation, whereas you are starting from a completely fresh ground, as it were.
I can say that I haven't been conscious of any planning controls as being any hinder in any way. I just mentioned fire, for example. This is an enormous problem in the Arctic, as you can imagine, and that one has to take seriously. But no, I'd say no, I haven't been conscious that, planning controls have said I have to do this, and it would be much more suitable to do something else. I think the limitations one feels more are probably that one has a kind of inborn attitude mind. One is part of a culture, use the term, quote from a book, the middle class European culture. The book, if anybody's interested in the North, is written by a fellow called Brodie and called The People's Land. And that is about Eskimos in the Eastern Arctic. But no, not those problems. Then, of course, there are kind of financial limitations, but that's fair enough. Canada needs to spend far more on housing than it does. There are 300,000 people living in slums in Montreal, so it'd be stupid to be wasteful in Resolute Bay. Oh, I don't think I can tell you that straight away. Amongst other things, the inflation's going on like mad. I can tell you one thing, that the finance situation is difficult now, as here. It's changed in Canada, that doesn't really help. That the original plan that this contracting firm made was one which they calculated out that the town would have cost $15 million. And Yellowknife said, not on your life, maximum $5 million. Well, then I picked up this program. Well, actually, I wrote the program myself. Of course, nobody had made a program, but I went through correspondence, picked it out, gave it to the town. This is the thing, like a first sketch, the thing I often do. It then gets the discussion going. And gave it to Yellowknife, the authorities, and said, well, I'm sure this isn't a good program. Do one yourselves. Take this and think about it, and then come with a decent program. Well, this actually never happened. And they just tended to say, go on, go on, go on. And I went on and went on. And then we got a calculation, and the thing came at $35 million. And Yellowknife said, oh, sure. You know, it's only money anyway. But of course, this is the other funny thing, you know, that, yeah, you know, there are occasions when people want to do things, and if there is money around, which is by no means certain, yet Ottawa hasn't said yes, and Ottawa has the purse strings, but they want to build a better township in the north. You know, the northern settlements are pretty poor, and they want to break this tradition. The old township, you know, the one that this engineering firm, it really didn't inspire anybody, and it wasn't probably worth more than 5 million, sort of idea on those terms. Though having new houses would have been worth quite a bit anyway. I wonder if we should go on to the next. Well, now, yeah, should we do that? Should we go straight over onto Byker? Okay. Well, can you go straight over onto Byker? What, these ones? Well, all right, just as a slideshow. These ones actually I took, and they are Greenland, and now what did that laugh mean? Can anybody interpret? Drop it? I can drop it. I've seen them before. What I was saying, I took these because actually I gave this talk in another place, and people didn't know about the north, and I only had drawings, and I was showing what has been built in the north. We'll try this, just flip, flip, flip. That's the way you get there. You move around in helicopters. This is the way we travel around. That's my wife. It's an Eskimo crew, and it's a government ship. This is, one stop here, this is the township I talked about, where you go to the top of the hill to see the sun, but they built new housing on the north side of the hill, and it doesn't get the sun until, I would guess, round about May. It's a beautiful place. Population of about 3,000 people and about 7,000 dogs, and the dogs eat the people. Next. They do really, a few a year. This is, you know, typical Danish low-cost housing, and it's pretty good housing, but looking at these pictures, I can just make one comment you can remember, that the Danes have a problem. It is, you know, it's been accused of being a kind of typical colonial situation. I don't think it is. It has that element in it. But they've at times had policies which seem wise, and they've gone wrong time and again. And one of the chief components is that every time they wanted to, you know, hunting failed, they introduced fishing. And they'd earlier, for a long period, tried to protect the Eskimo culture, the hunting culture. When they went into fishing, they needed boats. Eskimos could build wonderful kayaks, but they could not build fishing boats. So Danes did it. And it's been like that the whole bloody time. As the Danes say, and the Eskimo elite say, you know, the Danes do it, and the Eskimos are left with their arms crossed. And now they're getting all this alienation and problems. Right, we flick on. Elderly lady, her house, interior, you know, the furniture and so on you buy in the better boutiques in the rest of the world. The Eskimos use it. It's very nice stuff. They assimilate it, use it easily, but it is not of them. An Eskimo engineer living in a block of flats. Should I move? I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll sit down and you can see. The kind of terrain, as you see here, enormously difficult. Carry on. The old buildings they've looked after, this is from what they call their colonial period. A short comment, which you may or may not realize. The Vikings were there from Eric the Red onwards. They died out. The climate got colder. It became better for Eskimos. The Vikings couldn't adapt from a fishing, farming culture to a hunting culture. The Vikings disappeared as the Eskimo came. The Scandinavians were away from Greenland for about 200 years. When they got there were no Eskimos there. Then the Scandinavians, the Danes and the Norwegians came back, and since then it's been Scandinavian again. But now the Eskimos are the dominating population, and they have built there as they build in Denmark. The ambition, this is part of Denmark, people up there should not have a worse standard than in Denmark. But it doesn't fit. Quite beautiful buildings. That is a laundry used by the Eskimos and the whites. These buildings here, these flats, they're completely mixed. You know, it can be kind of Dane living here and kind of Eskimos here and Dane there and Eskimos there and so on. And that goes fairly easily, but alienation. The old dwelling, I don't know whether it's Dane or Greenlander. They say Greenlander because they're mixed race, they're not really Eskimos. Terrace housing. This, more of this utilidor stuff. This is a self-built house by this family. The wife wants to move into a block of flats. The old guy wants to stay. 2- and 3-story terrace houses, pedestrian way, separated traffic. This is an Eskimo Greenlander teacher in his interior. The whole thing. I can make this, well, I'll make the side comment at the end. A private shop, used an architect. A small hotel, the bar in a hotel. Obviously the majority is a Greenlander because there are more Greenlanders than Danes there, but they're all mixed, self-service. Village hall, church, school. The school kids and the teacher did the painting. Ungdomsgård, youth centre. You know, as I've said before when doing this, you know, think if we could get this number of this decent buildings in Sweden. There's a level of this type of equipment which is higher than many small towns in Denmark. Then they realize, you know, this problem about the modern knowledges, so they built trade schools and all the rest of it. They have an elite, very impressive elite. I met quite a number of them. This is the Lord Mayor of one township. She is the wife of the technical advisor to the, whatever he is, the kind of county sheriff or whatever we'd say, Eva Henning. They're both Greenlanders. That lady was, and I talked quite a bit to her, she was the kind of quality of Lord Mayor and of person that we'd be very pleased if we had them in all our towns in Sweden or in England. But you've got the typical Ulands situation, and this leads over really to Byker. What I mentioned before, that certain types of people in certain situations do not have access to abstract thinking. These do. The ones who have access to abstract thinking will be those who govern and dispose and organize in modern complicated societies. Those who don't have access to it will be the ones who are governed. And they've got it there. They've got it to a degree in Byker, you've got it in this country, and we've got it in Sweden as well to a certain degree. And this is one of the barriers to be broken down. The situation in Greenland is such that there's very easy contact. You go to parties, there are always mixed Danes and Greenlanders, but it's Danes and Greenlander elite. And the big gulf is between the Danes and the Greenlander elite and the rest of the population. And they've started too late with their school. Now these are, I have a couple of Swedish schemes. Shall we go straight over onto Byker? Well, there are quite an, no. I can just stop at some suitable point. It was a traditional community. There was a kind of cross pattern of roads and there were trees in the corners. What we've done there, and you know we have similar problems there, what we've done there is grouped houses on the old city block. There was actually a building here and a building here. Very run down, some had disappeared. Varying between 35 and 50 dwellings. These are all rental flats, and there'll be rental houses as well on small sites, what we call flats on the ground. About 35 people makes to 50 people makes a group where you know everybody, but you're not forced into too much intimacy. Each group, you go to your flat across the court. You can get in from the outer side. Each group in the, we'll see that shortly, it has its little common building with the laundry and a common room. The main walkways, it's traffic separated. By the way, you are going off traffic separation in this country. You know, mixer courts and all the rest of the jazz, and Milton Keynes not least. I'm not quite sure whether this is based on careful observation or whether it's just a change of fashion. Here, this is traffic separated with access points, as we call it. You park out there, you park here and here, sort of idea. And there are arrival points. You get to within 50 meters of your dwelling from an arrival point. It's a protected one with a roof and so on and so forth that you park outside. And, you know, our observation and the studies that have been made, social studies have been made, that you get social exchange on pedestrian ways which you do not get when you get traffic in. And the other observation, and this applies also to suburban streets, and that suburban streets are amongst the most dangerous ones for small children, etc. In here you get playing for the smallest kids. In here you get playing for teenagers and grown-ups, you know, mini golf and badminton and ping pong and so forth. There's a little central kind of village green with more extensive. We had a school. It was planned as a big school here. We broke it up into three and then later 2 small schools. We broke it up further and got gymnasium, workshops, dining room spread around in the community, everything to turn it from an institution into part of the weave of the township, you know, our school rather than that school over there. Okay. This is the actual group. I am talking a bit, but I'll just give it short. The dwellings vary in size. 2 situations. One is gallery access, the other is with staircases. They all have a stoop. Is a stoop a word that's understood in English? Yeah. They all have a stoop. We made a study, talked to old people who lived in the old community, what they liked about it. Now, the old buildings had to be pulled down, it was said. We did a check, and it seemed it was right. We said that we could build new, but only on the condition that you at least got equivalent qualities to the old one, preferably you got better, and something that was positive in the old one must be found in the new one. That included stoops, included vegetation, included quite a lot of things. And I can mention this has now moved into quite a lot, and there are quite a number of people living here who lived in the old township, were born and bred there, well, this bit of the town, and they say that they recognize themselves in this, and they find it actually more pleasant than the old one. This is the central building. It's laundry, it's a common room. There are 5,000 crowns which belong to the common room for this group to furnish it as they like. There's the toddler's play space. There's a little workshop here, you know, repairing cycles and so on. There are, everybody on the ground floor has their own entrance and garden. The ones living upstairs get a balcony, but they can have an allotment, a little garden on the ground if they want. Another important thing, this is kind of semi-private or semi-public. We did an earlier scheme, and we found, you know, trying to create a scheme where people really felt at home there. And checking afterwards, after some years, we children from the area beside playing there. They say, you don't belong here, get out. And, you know, that wasn't a thought. So doing this, we tried to make this feel so it belongs to these people. We've tried to arrange diagonals across it and, you know, kind of welcoming entrances so that it isn't only, it doesn't become an exclusive area. Next.
Where was the money provided for the
State loan.
Where was the money for the common area provided?
State loan as well. You just redispose it. We can do this to a certain degree.
What, you've got a lump sum for the housing and you can...
You can do it, and it's been done to a certain degree. You can even, you know, you have to talk for it. But you can take the state loan, which presupposes a certain type of building, a certain type of plan, and so on and so forth. And you can say, especially if you've got the people with you, you know, if the people want it, that we redispose this money. It has been done that you've taken up a state loan, you know, people who want to build a collective. And they built quite small houses for themselves and used the rest. This happened in Denmark. I'm not sure whether it's happened in Sweden or not. I know it's been talked about. That the rest you use for common facilities of the type which are usually not included in this type of housing estate.
How do you argue when you come with a speculative development like Bovis? How do you rationalise that sort of thing with them?
Well, that's another longer story. I think, in a nutshell, Bovis, you think of Newmarket? Yeah, Studlands. There were 2 things that were important about Studlands. One, that it was a bad selling area, which meant that we could do decent environment and it would be low cost. This changed as soon as the market started operating and they could sell the houses expensive. They became expensive houses, and, you know, the low-income group couldn't get at them. And if they hadn't done it, other people would have bought the houses and sold them, including people who lived in them for a period. They'd sell them also expensive. The reason we got through with the whole of this plan, it was actually a guy called Sanderson, who at that time was the head of Bovis, and was interested in the idea, and 1 or 2 people under him. You know, that's a very short answer, but that summarized is it. And the other thing was, you know, that we wanted to do decent, you know, span type environment for low income groups. Well, there they couldn't sell expensively, so that was an advantage, or they couldn't initially. The other thing, the technique was, you know, what kind of architecture, to use that terminology. I just asked Fred Burley, who was the guy who was going to build it for them. He was a builder type, a Bovis man. Fred, how do you build cheaply? Cavity walls, gang nail trusses, and concrete towers, he said, so that's what we did. You know, it really simplifies the choices for an architect. You don't get involved in plastics or this, that, and the other. And it turned out bloody cheap until the market started operating, and then it went to pot. And all I got out of the extra price actually was, you know, a bit better planting and one little day centre. This, of course, has, you know, quite a decent day centre, but that's, you know, for kids. But that, roughly speaking, was the Newmarket operation. You know, it's the thing I usually say when talking to students and so on, that one of the best allies one has is a limited budget. Because if you get a fairly high budget, you know, you land in all sorts of difficult choices and very difficult temptations, you know. And, well, I tell you, I was in Oxford and Cambridge. This was the perspective of what it was meant to be. I can just mention one more, which is one I like. You know, package dealing, we've had that. It's on the back now, going backwards now. But one contractor said, of course, we will build this for you for the yardstick, use the terms, using our own advanced technical rational methods, and it will be cheaper and better, and so on and so forth. Now the council here, again, it was like Sanderson, you know, you are dependent on people. You're dependent first and foremost on the culture of the country and the world. And, you know, we help to form it or misform it. Then you are involved with people. And this township has an excellent city architect and excellent politicians. And that helps. That's one of the reasons why we could get that little central building. You know, because really it is unreasonable, though it could have been judged unreasonable, to build all this number of little common buildings. They said, that sounds a good idea, we'll do it. You know, it's like Resolute Bay, we want a town. No? And we've done it, and now these are popping other places of Sweden. No? Well, now, this was a contractor who, so, you see, the township said, no, we're not taking the package deal away. These are the qualities we want, this is a scheme we want. Everybody gives a price that they did, and they gave a price, and they did this scheme, and took away the difficult bits, you know which they are. Linking the corner gives a complication, and so on and so forth. So they simplified it to, you know, the loaves of bread sort of idea. The joy was that this was cheaper than the tender on this price, but another contractor came with a tender on this scheme, which was cheaper than that one. And we built this a bit below yardstick. Next. We're still building it. Sketch and reality of these walking streets. Carry on. Interior of the courts, you saw the exterior of the courts before. The exteriors are plastered. It's all built in this Ciparex stuff, lightweight, you know, thermalite you call it here. And you can either put wood or plaster on it. I put plaster on the outer side, wood on the inner side, sometimes horizontal, sometimes vertical, different colours and so on. And this is your little central building, and this is a gallery. But I can just mention a thing there. We'll be getting to Byker. The Byker galleries are intensive and joyous. These are a bit desolate. Why? The main reason is that the flats in Sweden are so much bigger, and they're wide front. You get a door, and you get a seat, and then you get a reasonable amount of flowers, and you get a gap. And then you do get a regulation with a width there. In other places in Sweden, we've reduced the width, and that improves straight away. We should have done it here. We're doing it in the later stage. You have to talk to the authorities. And, you know, I find you can get through with unconventional things, but not with this kind of old-fashioned academic architectural talk, you know, about non-real people, you know, kind of symbolics and all the rest. But when you can go to real people, you know, and how they experience, and especially if you can talk to real people and get real people to talk to politicians and so on, then I find it works on the whole. Next. Another picture. And then we'd have these, you know, play places the kids build themselves. We have a winter. This is a thing we have done for the last time, presumably. You know, heat in the pathway to melt the snow. But, you know, we are so rich that we have to take this oil crisis seriously. And I mentioned, you know, treble windows, you know, cheap loan to put in treble windows, national economy. No heating in streets, national economy. And, you know, scarce resources in the world. This was earlier on, now the vegetation's grown up, different colours. Next. Well, and in this, I can just mention this group, you see, what would be the equivalent of the Lord Mayor. He lives in one of these houses. We do get this mixing in Sweden to quite a considerable degree, and there aren't the obvious barriers. But when you start analysing, you'll find nonetheless that intellectuals tend to forego with intellectuals and so on. It does sort itself out nonetheless. I could tell quite a story about analysis that has been done. Some time ago they thought they were getting towards egalitarian society. They have discovered, for example, that also in Sweden 80% of the students in universities are from income group 1 and 2, middle class and upwards, despite all sorts of administration and financial tricks. Next. Little day centre for the kids. That's the end of that lot. No, it isn't. Interior of the day centre for the kids. Well, then some time ago, I'll just say a word about this. I suddenly thought, this is extraordinary. Here we are, always drawing these houses for people. And where are the rest of the animals? And we started doing this kind of thing. Well, now, one of the things that I learnt going to Sweden, you know, and that is that they're terrific believers in research, utredningar. Yes, no, Michael? You know, utredning would be research, would it? Or surveys, so on. You know, what's it about? You know, they started with all this thing that led to Parker Morris, you know, studying the kitchen, studying the living room, studying the dwelling as a whole, studying the group of dwellings, the dwellings in relation to the ground, and so on and so forth. The result is not necessarily frightfully good. But I can tell you, and it's certainly not pretty, but it isn't so bad as some of the things I see in other parts of the world, which might include, and part of the reason is this careful study, but, you know, they tend to have an overbelief in it. Well, now, I made a bad mistake, because I just went the old intuitional way, and I drew a nice dwelling for birds, you know, and it was a very pretty one. There were lots of holes and little sticks for them to land on and a roof to protect them and so on. But, and I didn't do any research, but I met a guy who he'd been interested in birds, and he looked at that and he said, sure. He said, but of course you'll only get certain birds. Well, what do you mean? Well, there'll be starlings and things like that. And then you suddenly thought, Christ. And I said, well, so who wouldn't you get there? You wouldn't get tits, he said. You suddenly realise, you know, that this is the old thing that I've been preaching about as far as people. At times in Sweden they said everybody likes point blocks, everybody likes flats, everybody likes one family house. And I've always been preaching that different people like different things, and are we really talking about the open society, or aren't we? You know, what is our model? Is it identical people, or is it people of different types, even liking different things at different ages? Birds are like that. We've got the birds who like lots of flats, and we've got the birds who like one family houses with a bloody big garden. And I was so sloppy I didn't even trouble to find out. But fortunately I met this guy who had taken the trouble. So that one, you see, is for the ones who like semi-Ds, and we've got flats. And we've got one family houses, and the garden has to be a certain size, you know, revere it's called sometimes. Next. And this was the other one, which actually I had in for other reasons. Here was part of this screen wallery. You know, we have that type of a climate. It's not so hard as Resolute Bay, but we can just carry on. It's standard structure, but the flats, the choice of flats, even for the same size of flat varies. Short story. Earlier, I did a scheme in the north of Sweden. I moved windows about the place. And, you know, the city father and the architect asked me, why have you done that? And I said, individualization. You know, architects invent terms. It sounds terrific, individualization. Well, what do you mean about that? Well, you have different experience of different flats. Well, what does that mean? Well, you go in, and sometimes the window's in the middle of the wall, sometimes the corner. Well, who likes the window in the corner? Well, people in Venice do. But have they chosen it like that themselves? And finally they said, you know, go home and tidy it up, which I did, and it got better for that. Well, then, when I did this one, you know, there's another kind of, I think, basic part of my philosophy there. Don't look upon these kind of people as enemies. You know, they might even be more sensible than you are. And you really have to try their way before you discover whether it's true or not. This even includes people in positions of authority, though that is sometimes doubted. But in this one, you see, there were two or whatever it was, 3-bedroom flats in 2-story and 1-story, different, you know, real different experiences. Everybody thought it was a lovely idea. And then, you know, you get this kind of result, and next pictures, I think, show the same. You know, this kind of result. not because, you know, one's doing architecture. Well, I think because one is doing architecture. One's not doing this aesthetic game first, and then finding, after motivization, this is the great art of architects. You know, finding out what looks nice and then trying to stuff people into it. There is another way when you find out what people want and see what it leads to, and this is what it led to. Huh? And these are terrace houses, and one of the points of talking about this one was that in this, partly we have mixed development. The non-mixed development has been a definite problem in Sweden. You know, they have certain dreams. Their dream is, you know, the egalitarian society. Am I exaggerating, you think? They also had a policy to house the whole population, which they've more or less done. You know, they don't have that kind of slum. You know, they have new ones, but not old ones. And they built like mad, and they built, I'm given to understand, more dwellings per 1,000 people than anywhere else, and so on and so forth, and it was mostly in these slab blocks. And it was the Henry Ford method. You built these in one place, and you used big cranes. Other place you built one family house. Then they started analyzing, you know, researching, utredning. And it was the young social and economic students, the radicals, who did it. They'd already looked into the universities, I mentioned that before. They also found, of course, that you've got a tendency for lower income groups to live in flats and upper income groups to live in one-family houses. That in the upper income groups, children will tend to be more stimulated. You know, they are professional people. The friends who come in and the discussions at home of one kind. They tend to look at a more mixed type of program on the box, on the TV, and so on and so forth. And also parents push kids and so on. Whereas in the other group it is so, but it is less so. Well, then you do the next planning thing, of course, and that is you have your housing and you say it is sensible that children walk to school and don't have to drive to school. And then they start thinking about this and they realize they're getting a tendency, you get more stimulated kids in the one type of school, less stimulated kids in the other type of school. The interested in teachers will tend to prefer to teach in the more stimulated school than the less stimulated school, and so you are perpetuating a situation which was not the aim of the ambition. It was just, you know, an ad hoc thing that happened. So they've even discussed busing in Sweden. Swedish children to Swedish schools. This was mixed development. Now, I didn't have the whole of this clear, but it was this feeling, you know, that this kind of separated out, analyzed out, you know, make the analysis and build the analysis instead of making the synthesis after the analysis. We got the mixed development, and the other thing, mixed tenure. Here we've got rental flats, we've got rental housing, we've got residence association flats, we've got residence association housing, and we've got private housing for sale for ownership on old site. And we'll carry on and look at it. And it works. Though, you know, everybody tend to say it wouldn't. This is more of it. This one here, for example, these are the type of situations you get. These are housing for sale. These are, if I remember, condominium housing association. There are flats around the corner. And I went around this and asked all these people, these are the people with the maximum choice possibility, what they felt about living here. Would it have been better that the flats were further away from the houses? One said yes. How far? 100 yards or so. All the others said, no, this is fine. But, you know, the type of society they were after and so on. And, you know, kids play together. And this is part of the Greenland story, by the way, and it's part of the Byker story. Because in Byker, we're rehousing Byker people. And in Greenland, they mix as policy, Danes and Greenlanders, in the housing area, in the flats. You start checking, how much do you actually mix? Well, you know, we say good day, and so on and so forth. Well, does this have any import? Well, the answer I got from quite a number was this. You know, an elderly woman took me out, Dane. So look around here, that's Greenland, Greenland, and Greenland. We don't have parties together, no. You know, this is a shame, but we don't. And this happens in Drottningholm, where I live. You know, that certain types of people gather together and others don't. But what she said was, how long is this going to go on? The only hope of changing this is the kids, and the small kids in their formative age. Here, the kids from all the different backgrounds play together. There is a hope that would help. If you don't do this, you've lost that hope as well. So, you know, that is the type of dream. This is all, by the way, council housing, so, you know, state loan housing. On the Swedish level. I've done housing in Byker, and at the same time I've done housing in Spanish Harlem or Calcutta or whatever you like. No, enough said about all that. Okay? I think we now... Well, then, you know, and the important thing, you know, architecture, it is not for the architectural gossips, it's not even for the critics or for the colleagues, but it's for these type of people, and there are all sorts of different ages and might be different races. Even Sweden, 10% of the population has come to the country since the war. Finland, Turkey, and places like that. Next. If you do a gallery towards the sun with flowers, this is the first time I do it in the seats, this will tend to happen. It will tend to become kind of street in the air. We discovered also unexpectedly that this was a nice play place for kids with tricycles, and you do have contact with what's happening on the ground. Next. And it is for the old people and the young people, as I showed before, and for the cats and the dogs. But they have certain disciplines on them there. Well, then we get to Byker. Is everybody fed up? What about you, Michael? I've got to check. You see, he's married to my daughter. And this is a pretty tricky situation. You know, in Russia they have their polytrucks, huh? Well, I suppose I don't... People know the Northeast. How many people here have lived in this type of an area? Hands up. One. 3 on that side. Probably 2 in another room. Another thought for you. You can read this book, you know, it's about Eskimos and Southern Canadians, but it applies to Englishmen or Swedes or whatever you like. The People's Land by a fellow called Brodie. He works in the Scott Polar Institute in Cambridge. I've even been in South Africa. I don't dare say that really in Sweden, but I was actually talking about all this integrated community stuff. Everybody spends a lot of time looking at the other tribes, but not at their own tribes. And this is really fascinating. You can take South Africa. They look at the black and the mixed-coloured tribes. But, you know, the white tribes are unbelievable. There are English people there, and there are Afrikaners, and there are Italians and Germans and so on. And they've all got their attitudes, you know, and their culture, which they carry with them. And they're partly conscious of it, but mostly unconscious of it. And that's interesting about Brodie. And there are plenty of other books written about this kind of thing. One of the problems which has been pointed out at home, probably here, that we unquestionably have, you know, I am planning for Eskimos, amongst others, in the Canadian Arctic. Why? Because the Canadians seem to feel that I've thought more about the North than most of the other Arctics, which is possibly true, but is not very impressive, you know, because I know how much I know, and that isn't frightfully impressive. This is, you know, the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and one-eyed men are building towns. And not many one-eyed women. There's one here. There's another there. There are a few. But the other thing is, you know, in Byker, and in all these types of situations, the most of the population of the world are in Byker-type situations or worse. And they're all being planned for by people who have... and living in the snow if you're going to plan in the Arctic. There is one guy who's lived in Byker for 7 years, and that's Vernon Gracie, for example, who is living in the office here. But there are very few, and most people, and we had the same experience ourselves, they can look at this. Here is Byker, and because we're interested, you notice all the corner shops. I can tell you one thing, and that is that they asked me, would you like to plan Byker? I said, I don't know. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you know, I've talked to you, and you in that case were some politicians, and I've talked to the planners and the architects. But I haven't talked to anybody down there, and they're all there. So this seems ridiculous. Give me a month. They said, fine, have a month. And I was there, and his wife, my daughter, was there, and Arnie Nielsen from the office. And we talked to people, and we found out a lot there. And this was pretty important. But, you know, it's still asking people not experiencing it directly, but what the hell are you going to do? Resolute Bay cannot be planned by the Eskimos. It can't be planned by the whites who are up there. Because, you know, as yet they haven't learnt the job. And you have to learn some of the job. Traditionally, you see, the Negroes in South Africa, they build much more sophisticated communities in their old original time. I've seen them in Botswana and even in South Africa than the white suburbs. They don't know it, and the whites don't know it. But, you know, nobody's taken the trouble to do a newt raiding, the research. But somehow, at some points, you have to step in, and we had to. But you can at least take the trouble to find out. We found out several things. You know, our first thing, you looked at the plan, you looked at the buildings. What did they want? They wanted the Shipley Street bars. The planners had others, or perhaps not the planners, somebody anyway was going to pull them down because they wanted to build a new swimming bath somewhere else. And there was a laundry and so on. They wanted the laundry. Well, aren't you going to have washing machines in the house? Well, no, we can't afford them, but later on you might have them. Oh, we think we'll still go to the laundry. Maybe they think wrong, but they prove that they think right once, twice. Maybe they think right. Why do you think you'll go to the laundry? Well, it's nice with a good laugh, they said. And, you know, not many people stand in front of a washing machine and have a good laugh in their cellar. But they do in the Shipley Street bars. They wanted their corner shops, and I talked to the commercial experts. These were English ones, but I've talked to Swedish ones. Corner shops are out. Why? It's the big rational unit selling more and more goods, more and more, better and better goods, cheaper and cheaper to more and more people. And, you know, I've tried this one of talking to them and talking about shops being a social function and so on. You don't get anywhere on that one, but you can go to Christiana. You know, I've talked about shops, corner shops, up in the mountains in Sweden. I planned one. You know, and I observed the way Lapps came in from the mountains and others came in from the mountains. You know, and to buy a packet of sugar, it took 2 hours because you talked about ptarmigan snaring, you talked about hunting, reindeer herding and everything. You know, it really was a thing. It was a club. Huh? And the shop was actually planned as an ordinary shop with a desk, and you know, the shopkeeper should have been behind the people in front, but they weren't. They were all mixed up. So I planned one with, you know, tables and seats and a nice view out. You know, you could have a beer and so on and so forth. It didn't get built, but they built it. You know, these people, do you know about Christiana in Copenhagen? Perhaps you don't. They moved into a military area and occupied it, and there are shops there, and they're all like that. They've all got seats and tables and, you know, fun and everything. They don't even pay VAT. Well, that's maybe not a good thing. They wanted their corner shops. I'll come a little bit back to the corner shops. They wanted their pubs. Let's go on and look at the next pictures. It's partly flat and it's partly sloping. It has very tough brutalist architecture. Brutalist architecture was an English invention. Here you will recognize it. And quite a number of people have said, you know, isn't that lovely? And we fell for this a bit, and also this is a play street, you know, and be careful, be careful. This is a working, so this is not a slum, it's a rundown area. It's still working socially, huh? Though a certain change, you know, negative change happening. Mostly old people left and so on and so forth. Very careful, very careful. Well, the old houses. I remember asking a guy, what about the old houses, you know, revitalizing them and putting them in order. God, no. Take them away. They all wanted to live in Byker. That's clear, you know, that is the way the Northeast works. You were born and bred in Byker or in Scotswood or in Walk or whatever you like. You're also in Newcastle on Tyne in the Northeast. But not in those old houses. Well, why not? You know, they could be put in. Oh, no, they couldn't. Why not? Do you know how they put them down? No, I said, they pull 3 bricks out of the corner and the fuckers fall down, they said. So there was involvement for you. And actually, the town had looked into it. You know, the town of Newcastle has done some quite good revitalization. These are beyond the pale. Very difficult to do. Bad condition and internal disposition is difficult. They're the Tyneside flat, you know it. Huh? 1 flat up, 1 flat down, 2 doors beside one another on the floor. The ground floor people stand on the street and talk to the neighbours. The upstairs people, if they are old, it's a very steep stair, are completely isolated. And, you know, the northeast, the Geordie chumminess is only partially true. people coming from the west of England, there's a fellow in the office, and others find it difficult to get deep contact with them, real contact with them. The play place, we thought these were excellent play places. Later on we talked to people who were born and bred there and said they weren't, they were dull, they were long and they were straight, and there were people inside who didn't like kids. You know, don't believe it. People have kids, but they don't like them much. Quite a lot of them. You asked about Bovis. You know, the rules of housing for sale is 2 cars on every site and no play places outside. And you say, what about the kids? But of course, housing for sale is not buying homes, it's buying property and operating the property game. And a play place for kids outside reduces the value of the property, so you don't have a play place for kids. Of course, the kids are not on the budgetary committee. They don't have any money. Wow, you know, Bob a day. So what actually happened on these back streets was that they soon found out, they told me, the ones that accepted kids playing outside, and some accepted kids playing in the backyard, and the ones who didn't. The ones who didn't, they either swore at them or knocked them or called the police. And yeah, it wasn't much good. Next. Well, there is your working man's club, which is the Northern pub, and you know, a lot has been talked about the English pub, what a wonderful institution. When these were built, they weren't other than for the men. You know, it was men only, apartheid again. Since the war, of course, it's men and women, but no kids. So it's got improved. There is the bingo, the Raby Street Bingo Hall and Cinema, and the whole place has any number of shops, you know, and in our new areas in Sweden, we cannot get a Raby swap shop. And it's partly because of the financial situation, financing system. You know, the instruments we're using are the wrong instruments. You've got to change the instruments. We've done that partly in Byker. We are getting corner shops in Byker. Next. And this is, you know, all these people were 1, 2 generations back, probably quite good hand workers. They were farmers and so on and so forth. This is the level of handwork you tend to get. You know, how they build ships, yeah. But we'll show you the new stuff. This is the Byker. Well, that's funny. Just go on 2 for interest. Oh yes, that's right. Well, I'll take those 2 first, and then I'll come back to the other 2. This kind of connected in. Now, part of the story was give us a month. We got our month. We came back with an adjusted program. They'd done a pre-scheme. They'd had the, you know, a form of Byker wall, protection against the traffic noise and so on. And they'd had other things. We came back with, on the basis of the talks we'd had there and our own thoughts, you know, corner shops and things like that. We also came back, another thing we discovered, of course, fairly early, that there was a them-us situation. Us, that was the people in Byker. Them is the people up in the civic centre. You know, a very big, very important, actually very ugly, but that's another matter. But certainly very expensive building. I've forgotten how much they spent on the candelabras in the building, you know. And they got slums round the corner, you know. Sheer Renaissance. It happens to be ugly, which is actually better than some of these very expensive Renaissance monuments, which are beautiful. Of course, then you can be tricked to believe they're good. Well, this being a them-us situation, we did the same thing as we later did with the Eskimos. You try and strengthen the hand of the weaker part. Well, I didn't tell you all about that in the Eskimos. I guess I'll have to leave it out. But, you know, you try and strengthen the hand of the weaker part. Shall I leave it out? Shall I touch on it? The problem is, this links directly to Byker. I mentioned before, you know, access to abstract thinking. Resolute Bay, Byker will tend to be a one-class community. Now, that class may change characteristics, but we have the ambition, and have had from the beginning, the ambition. Byker people want to stay in Byker. Ones who've moved out want to move back, not in them houses, but in new houses. So we've had the policy, you know, house Byker people. And so far we built about a third of Byker, a third and a half, over 1,000 dwellings, and only Byker people have moved in. Well, this seems, you know, both wise and sensible. And, you know, what else would you do? The worry I have is that, you know, you are again permanenting the situation, that you're getting one-class society and one type of attitude of mind. And to change that, it'd mean less biker people and others coming in, which also is not acceptable. You know, this is the kind of Greenland situation. There is no good answer. Well, now, part of the process in Byker, of course, we realized early. I'll carry on about Byker just a little bit, and then I'll touch back and link it back to the Eskimos, which is part of my story, you know, that these human situations, one can get involved, one can get confused by climate or by race and think, you know, this is a totally different situation, but it ain't, I think. That we, first, as I mentioned, started thinking about reproducing the structure, being careful, reproducing the structure, saving as many buildings as possible. Now, one of the things that influenced me a good deal was up at the community centre, which exists in Byker, talking with a fellow who was born and bred in Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. then was not a new town, it was a little mining village. He managed to go the academic way, a certain number do. And he'd become, I've forgotten whether a sociologist, psychologist, whatever, and he was working in Washington, D.C. And he was there, incidentally, pretty involved in the whole of the Negro situation there. Now, we talked about this, you know, and being careful and so on, and this, I think, is important. You know, we have bashed old towns far too much. Well, now you get the swing of the pendulum, and, you know, you start leaning over backwards. Possibly we were leaning over backwards a bit, but he said, you know, be careful about that one, and we said, why? And he, well, partly he told us to read a book, Hogarth, I think it is, Hogarth, The Uses of Literacy, and that is, you know, about the working class culture, which is a subculture in Britain. It was he who pointed out the whole of this about abstract thinking. The ones who can't do it will be the governed. And they'll either be governed by governments or by business or by trades union leaders or whatever. And the ones who can do it will be the governing. He reckoned that part of our job was to create a new Byker with somehow an opening a window against a changed situation, another world. And he talked about his experience, for example, of coming back to Washington, D.C. He talked about that we have learned, and we imagine we've experienced this kind of warm contact in the type of Byker situation between people. He said, yes, when he came back to his family in County Durham, the family opened, and it warmly enclosed him as well. And, you know, they all sat round and chatted, and Aunt Matilda, or whatever her name was, chatted away with Aunt Mary, and they had a whale of a time. And then Aunt Matilda went, and Aunt Mary said, isn't she a bitch? And the whole of the talk, you know, was about the football games and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not being derogatory, but, you know, just trying to find out what it's a bit about. You know, I also like watching the football and so on, and playing it. But, and then he left, and the family closed again. And when he came back, he was accepted as Little Willie. When he left, it was Little Willie who's left. And nobody thought of asking him anything about America, or the Negro situation, or the situation of underprivileged and privileged, you know, or who governs who, and so on and so forth. And he reckoned that if we reproduce too much the Byker situation, insofar that architecture can influence this type of thing, and it isn't sensational what architecture can do, but it will have an influence, and you can't avoid the responsibility. You can't, except by non-acting. If you act, there will be a certain influence. Other things will influence much more. But that if we reproduce, we will tend to reproduce that type of situation. And as I say, I have a worry about this one-class society. But that was that about Byker. Well, now I can link back there just briefly to the Eskimo situation, where we're in a different situation. It's a new town, and it will be a mixed population. Everybody wants to be integrated, and that seems natural in in the Arctic situation. I even wondered actually whether it wasn't quite a good situation. The Eskimos down there, the whites up there, the Eskimos running their own village, learning more and more about it, getting help, but not being interfered with, and then sometime later you did it. What it seemed to me you couldn't do, and nobody up there would accept, was to build a new Eskimo community and a new white community. As it was there, it was an ad hoc situation and had certain advantages. You couldn't do it new because then it became a conscious action, a policy. Well, the question is, what did you do? The Eskimos, A, will be in a minority. The Eskimos do work in the airport. One of them is the head of one of the air companies there. And the young white man leaving, this happened a few years ago, I asked him, I said, how will Andrew cope with the Eskimo, Andrew Pudluck? How will he manage that? Oh, we'll manage fine, he said. Well, now the talk goes on, you see, that the Eskimos, they don't have the same time sense, they're less responsible, presumably because they're all hunting people, etc., etc. It goes on. It goes on endlessly in Greenland. And in Greenland, they always get caught up and finish off with, they don't know, this does actually happen, that Eskimos, they're not on the job at the time, and people can be, even Eskimo fishermen can be waiting for a ship to be repaired and it doesn't get repaired and so on. They're not clear, the Danes, is this an Eskimo characteristic or is it just that Eskimos traditionally have not been given responsibility? Danes have always done it for them. This does happen, but what this young white Canadian said, which I thought was pretty impressive, I said, well, what about Andrew? Will he manage it? Yes. Won't he make mistakes? Sure, he'll make mistakes, he said. But he said, he won't make the same mistakes as I do. But I make some mistakes as well, and I don't make the same mistakes that he'll make. But he'll manage it, and Andrew has managed it. And it's big Boeing 707s that come up with goods and people, and it works fine. And then every now and again something doesn't work. But that's the situation. But generally speaking, of course, the Eskimos will be less used to running townships. They're going to make it a hamlet. It's going to have its own finance, local government, and so on and so forth. It'd be very easy that the majority of whites used to this type of operation, sitting on committees and all the rest of it, talking with government, contacting Ottawa, dominate the whole thing. Or else it would be easy that they lean over backwards not to do so, and that's also an artificial situation. We discussed, rigging the franchise. You have a residency qualification. If you make it 3 years, there'll be very few whites, because very few whites stay that long. But then you'll get a dissatisfied majority, and one who can be very vocal. You could decide on the same proportion of Eskimos and whites on the council. This has all been discussed. One of the things we have done is we move the Eskimos up first. They get a first residency rights. Also, since they move first, they obviously choose the sites they want, and they chose, I think, very well. If you remember the plan, it was like that. They chose a strip of houses here and a strip of houses there. Eskimos have contact with Eskimos. Eskimos' wives have contacts with Eskimo wives, and they have a bit more to gossip with one another about than they do with whites. But a very big frontal contact with all the whites who come. Whites will take one-family houses because this is the preferred dwelling for many people in Canada. But, this is a big problem. In Byker, we seem to be caught, as far as I know. But the only thing we can do and try to do, and that is that through the whole of this planning and building process, we get people involved. This is one of our conditions for the town, was that we would have an office in the township, in Byker, and not in the town. That meetings with the politicians and the government officials would be in Byker and not in the town hall. In other words, the stronger ones should come to the weaker ones and not the other way round. And this is the way it has worked. We got involved in the risk of it becoming a political issue. It has to a certain degree. But, well, there is a story to that. I don't think I'll tell it. I'll tell it in other countries, but not here. We work for the Conservatives there, and it goes very well. Well, this then is our shop. It was, believe it or not, a funeral parlour. This is our office. Funeral parlour, is that the term in English or is that American? Yeah. But they also arrange weddings. And up there, Vernon Gracie has lived for 7 years. He's now moved out into one of the new flats. He's been through the whole process. This is our shop, Kendall Road. This is another corner shop, which we got Citizen Advice Centre in. We have found that people tend to come still a hell of a lot to us. You know, architects in this type of situation are playing a rather central role. People know that one is acting, one's influencing things. They tend to come to us a lot. Down there is the corner shop. Now, just a short story about the corner shop. This is architecture I'm talking about, of course. Now, I've talked to commercial experts in Sweden. I've talked to them here, and I told you earlier what they always say about the rationale of the process. Now, I've also told about my thoughts about this little shop in the mountains and about the shops I've observed in Christiana. But I went to this man and wife who run this shop down here. It's on that corner. You know, and corner shops are frightfully convenient. We've rationalized them out in Sweden. We're trying to recreate them, finding it difficult. They're open later. You know the people and so on and so forth. Went in and talked to them. How's it go? It goes fine. What about prices? Oh, the same prices in Shield Roads. That's the main shopping street. Now, corner shops often have somewhat higher prices. They didn't. And lots of customers. Oh, yes, lots of people come in. They all buy something. Oh, no. Oh, well, what do you feel about that? Oh, that's excellent. Well, why do you feel that? Oh, you'd be surprised. There are a lot of lonely people around here. They love to come in for a chat. And then the kids, they like to come in and talk with us and talk with one another. And, well, you know, we're not only a shop, you have to realize, we're also a community function. You know, and that was from the corner shop owner. But I don't get it from the commercial experts. And we are getting the corner shops, and we're doing it by a process of, I'll touch on that later. Our architect shop, this is Vernon Gracie, this is the kids theoretically helping him wash his car. Next, and there are people living around, as you saw. And you know, this is the situation, open front. There were some discussions about keeping the screens, but we took them away. And people came in and out, and the kids came in and out. And there's their work. And the chief planner came in and out. That's actually a fellow from Sweden. We have a constant interchange between the Swedish and the English office. Next. And everybody works hard. These are the kids. And, you know, this was obvious. I've always had my office beside my house, and our kids, including his wife, came in, and since we were drawing, they drew. And the neighbours' kids came in since we were drawing, they drew. And we moved the office out into the islands in the summer, and there you could observe farmers and fishermen's families. And in farming families and fishermen families, the mother and father work with farming and fishing, and the kids play with farming and fishing. You know, and Eskimos work like that, and there's this common interest. And, you know, the cleavage, the alienation does not arise to the same degree. So obviously, we opened the doors at 5 o'clock, in the kids came, and we closed them at 6 o'clock, and that was quite an adventure every time. It became a ceremony, you know, some under the table, some up the stairs, and all the rest of it, pulling them out by their ears and chucking them out. We had a list on the door, you know, we couldn't have them all in at one time, so it was all worked out who came in which day and so on. And some of the fellows went on working, especially if they were Swiss. Next. And we had all sorts of visitors, and it was the locals, and it was their kids, and it was mums and dads, and we often had to take in kids because parents chucked them out, and it was raining. And this isn't necessarily, you know, parents not liking kids, but it's certainly parents not liking kids the whole time, and I've had kids, and I know that I feel deeply for them. They were living in, you know, kind of minimum flats, 1-2-room flats with, you know, 3 or 4 kids, and it became absolutely impossible. They chucked them out, and it was raining. We had more room, so in they came. So we became a kind of day nursery as well. And then you could walk out straight away, you know, and look at the surroundings. You could talk to people. You could look at the site and so on. And you could talk with the representative of the contractor or reps and so on. And this was a situation I observed when I came back after the war to Britain, which I didn't notice when I was living here. And that is that you have two races in Britain. Actually, you have several, but there are two obvious races, and they're Anglo-Saxon, whatever that is. That's pretty mixed, all right. But the two races are the middle class upwards and the middle class downwards. And the middle class upward, the middle class gentlemen are about this height and have that type of dialect, and the middle class downward are about that height and have another type of dialect. And this is inimical situation to the type of society that we might dream about. Of course, it's like the jockeys in Newmarket. I've worked in Newmarket. They were, as the county architect, the runt of the pack, but he said, they're spoiling for it, the whole of racing's going to collapse. You know what the buggers are doing? They're feeding them orange juice in the gaubles. And then, even Japanese become tall. Next, and better housing. And better housing. Well, then we exhibited in the window plans, drawings, models, and then here you have, I consider, a real architect's office work, which can be proved by these signs. Has anyone lost a tricycle? Ask the architect. Anybody lost a key? Please inquire inside. A reward will be given to anybody giving information leading to the safe return of 2 guinea pigs stolen from their hutch by the hobby room opposite the architect's office. Any request for confidence will be observed. Please come to the architects. Those guinea pigs, of course, also belong to these very small flats. Eskimo houses are untidy. They have a lot of kids in a small house and very few cupboards. These Tyneside flats were enormously small. Obviously parents were not keen on having guinea pigs in them. So obviously the architects had to have guinea pigs outside their office. This. I'm sure you're taught this in the AA, aren't you? And we had them outside, and obviously Byker people are like people. Suddenly they pinch them. You wouldn't think it was necessary because they reproduce at a fantastic pace. A much less important sign is this one. I was actually at the RAB building. It really is fantastic, isn't it? Next one. I wasn't talking about the aesthetics. Well, then we found an area that somebody had pulled down houses quite a long time ago and forgotten. And we reckoned we could get houses in. And another of the things we discovered what people wanted, and that was action. They wanted new houses. They wanted new houses quickly. There was a guy or a woman or whoever it was who explained to me that they started talking about replanning Byker before the First World War. They stopped during the First World War. They talked during the whole time between the wars. They stopped during the Second World War. They talked during the following World War. And they wanted action, and they wanted action quickly. And we found also it's very difficult to get people involved in their common interests until they feel safe and that they're going to get their house. We arranged early allocation. Usually council houses, you get them after they're built. We arranged that they're allocated when we're still drawing them. People know where the house is, which house it's going to be. They choose themselves, and they can follow the whole process. And then they feel safer and quieter. And then you can get them interested in common interests. Now, this was the pilot scheme. And it was outside the area that we had a commission on, but we got commission on it, and we built, I think, 46 houses, I remember, on this. And they were a pilot scheme. Now, there are 2 observations that we made, 2 or 3, quite a number, but one of the observations was it is tricky to do a pilot scheme in this type of a situation. You discover certain things about the specific needs there. You improve in the final stage. In the next stage you work on. These people feel they've been used as guinea pigs. Obviously, as an architect, you're doing this the whole of your life. You learn from one scheme, you carry on, you do improvements in the next, hopefully. But these people feel they've been utilized. And one should have finance in so you can go back and reintroduce into this the improvements you make in the later stage. And this is essential. It's difficult to get that finance. The other thing is that it easily gets overloaded. Here you see old houses around, and they were the old type street, insufficient lighting. It was proved that this was much more attractive as a play place. It was equipped, certain play equipment, seats, benches, well lit and so on. It became totally overloaded with children playing, with teenagers there. And the residents asked us to take away the seats. There are other things that you can observe, and so in other words, introducing environment which has appreciably better qualities in an area with appreciably less, can lead to trouble. We then try to get the town to go back and introduce play places and lighting in the surrounding area. This is difficult in a town which has an endless need of new housing. They don't want to invest in housing that's anyway going to be pulled down in a few years. Next. This is Arthur Gray opening it. This is the bench and table. We thought of, how pleasant, people sitting outside and so on in the sun. We've done it in Sweden. This is, on common ground. Don't need to invite in. Don't need to stand hanging on the doorstep as they used to and so on. The residents asked us to take it away. Well, we used the old bureaucratic trick. We said, okay, we'll take it away. We asked why. It's, of course, teenagers and so on coming, making a noise at night and so on. So they insisted, so we said, okay, we'll take it away. And the bureaucratic trick was not to do it, of course. But they carried on insisting, and then they started helping because it came round to November. Guy Fawkes Day and bits disappeared. It's wood. So finally we had to take it away. We thought, is this a problem? Presumably the overloading. We will do it in continuous areas of new environment. There were also a hell of a lot of kids here in new environment. It will probably work there. It does. It works a bomb, no problems whatsoever. Nobody wants us to take anything away. On the contrary. Next. Underpasses, architects like them, the people living up there don't unless you can afford all the acoustic protection, which you can't afford in yardstick housing. We here tried, as an experiment, to reproduce a type of back street situation, the old Byker type, and you saw before the court, which was a kind of front street situation without the cars on it. This became straight away pretty slummy, vandalized, and has remained so. Next. This is presumably the social control of Jane Jacobs and so on. Well, now, I went straight past a couple of pictures, a picture and a plan of Byker. I'll cut that out, won't go back to it. I'll use this one. This is the whole of Byker. Do you remember the previous plan that there was a kind of street up here? Anyway, up here is Shields Road, the main shopping area, not only for Byker, but for the whole of eastern Newcastle on Tyne. They were going to bash a motor road through, and they pulled down all these houses before I got there quite a time ago. Well then, actually, it's part of the story that the Byker people suddenly observed they started building a building here, and they thought, joy, it is starting. And then they discovered it was a Masonic temple, and there were riots. Well, now, in this plan, we have maintained certain of the main streets in the old Byker plan. This is Raby Street. It was an old north-south connection, shopping street and so on. Headlam Street was also important. We've maintained this connection over here, Dun Terrace. There's a railway going through here, industrial railway to the industrial area down here, Dun Terrace, and that carries on to an area here which is going to become a recreation area. At the moment it's a dirty ditch, or so is the whole of the Tyne. The motorway went round here, separated this from its traditional shopping centre from the neighbouring areas here. What we've tried to do is build bridges over, pedestrian bridges and road bridges. This is the famous Byker wall, which gives acoustic protection against the traffic noise, and it is a wall. They originally said, it was decided in committee, we would not call this a wall because that sounds bad, we'll call it a perimeter block, and you can guess what it is called. There it is. And it is a wall, and it's serving the same function. It's protecting against unpleasant neighbours, but they don't come with cannon and swords. They come with lorries and a rapid transport that's going to go through here, and cars. You get noise, you get pollution. And this continuous building does protect the interior from that. Well, then it swells out at these points to start making better feeling of contact towards Raby Street. The bridges go over. Here it was designed with a pedestrian bridge there and a road bridge there. We've moved those beside one another, and we reckon then one will get a typical commercial situation. Intensive stream of pedestrians and car servicing from the back. There we will be able to get shops to pop, and we will get, hopefully, our Ponte Vecchio. Obviously Ponte Vecchio is nice because it's part of town and not just a windy bridge. It's also nice because things happen along it, and you can look in shop windows, you can buy things, you can see other people. And we hope it will pop because we have hopefully created a type of suitable commercial situation. There's no sense doing shops which become empty. This is even more depressing than no shops at all. There are quite a lot of old buildings which we largely keep. Churches, meeting halls, community centre. This is the... where is it? No, it's not on this plan. The Raby Bingo, but we are keeping it, and so on and so forth. There's an old school here, which part of it's been taken away. We're doing a new school there. And we had plans for having light industry in direct contact with the housing. Well, now, the characteristic of the site, it slopes to the south, slopes towards the Tyne. The Tyne is a filthy ditch. You know, they stomach pump them if they fall in. They really do, and they really have to. But they catch trout further up, and they are cleaning it, and they've had fish coming up. The air is filthy, but it is getting cleaner, and we notice an enormous difference in this part of Byker where we've built new. All the old houses had their open fires, and the dirt is unbelievable. In the new area, we do not get the same dirt. You know, it's quite an unbelievable sight to stand on the top of Byker Hill a winter day and see all this smoke coming out of the chimneys. This is the top of Byker Hill. It's the old Byker village, and it slopes very steeply here, around here, and it slopes more gradually here. Well, now, there's one thing I want to tell you about this Byker wall, and that is, which is this. This is the old Shipley Street bars, which we kept. It goes a bomb. The bars are still operating. The laundry has disappeared for diverse reasons. It's been reformed to community function. We would never have got finance, obviously, for a new building for that. We have generous space in the old building. We're probably going to paint it up. This is not the motorway. The motorway is going to be built short there. It's been downgraded, but it'll still be an urban motorway, what the hell they call it. Now, the problem is that to protect these people inside, you can't use people in the dwellings to protect them by giving these people in these dwellings a second-rate living condition. There's not room to use earthworks of sufficient height. It would reduce the site, and we're already in a situation where we cannot rehouse the whole of Byker population in Byker. It was just too dense before, and my feeling is we're still building too densely. You know, I don't believe in this high density stuff. You know, it may be economical, and there are quite a number of reasons for that. We are certainly on the edge of being too high a density. So we would be losing sight, less Byker people would be able to live in Byker. So you want to use a building. Well, now, the kind of building you could use would be a narrow building, a thin building, 6 meters. Is it 5? No, I think it's 6. I was even wondering if it's right. Yeah, it's 6. 6 meters with everybody living on the south side. They then get a very advantageous situation there at the top of the hill. When it's nice weather, and later the whole time, they'll get a wonderful view. They're on the sunny side of the building. This is the north. They're away from the North Sea winds and everything. You know, everything perfect except no money. Because that is a more expensive building, and quite rightly you have yardsticks. You know, if a country is going to house its whole population, this is a lot of finance, and you anyway want to waste a hell of a lot more finance on armaments and cosmetics and tobacco. So there ain't that amount around. So what do? There's really nothing you can do except increase finance, and this is what we set about doing. We designed the building, we did acoustic calculations, demonstrated how much was needed to protect the inside, you know, high frequency sound, low frequency sound rolling over the top, the whole thing. You know, the road is partly in a ditch, partly up in the air, and this gives different conditions. So we did all our homework. We talked to the town and said, obviously, you can't do this without more money. Give us some more money. And they said, sorry, no money for that. You know, you can work within the 10% tolerance. This went outside. No, we said we expected that. What about the local Ministry of Environment? Yeah, talk to them, which we did. And again, no ad hocs, no préjudicat. What's préjudicat? Precedent. No precedent. No precedent. You get ad hocs for bad foundations, this, that, and the other, but you don't get it for motor road noise. we carried on, and we said, you know, this is unreasonable. And part of our argument was that this is unreasonable to put that on housing finance. It's a motor road cost, it's not a housing cost. You know, if you're going to bash a road through a town, you have to protect the dwellings around, and this is part of the cost of putting the road in. That road is a regional facility of use to the whole township, to quite a lot of the northeast. Unreasonable, these people should bear quite a section of the extra cost. Furthermore, these people themselves are relatively low income group. They're using less of the goods. They have relatively few cars, which they do. They are contributing less to the nuisance than other people are, and they're going to suffer more from it. The whole thing is unreasonable. We totally agree with you, as they said in the Ministry of Environment for the Northeast, but no precedent. So obviously what you do is you go to Whitehall, and we suggest to the city officers or the politicians, go to Whitehall, and, you know, said that we expected there would be a good lunch as well. They thought a good idea and didn't do anything about it, and we suggested again, they thought it was a good idea and didn't do anything about it. So finally I said to Vernon, we go, which we did, and we came back to Newcastle on time with an ad hoc promised for motor road noise. Well, now this is of considerable advantage to Byker, and I think I'm right in saying it's advantage to the whole country, because I think now it is built in that anybody can get an ad hoc for protection against motor road noise. So that's part of the story of the Byker Wall. The other part is, you know, it definitely works environmentally. Here is the shadow side, here is the noise, you go through, and there are the footsteps, and there is the sun, and the voices of people speaking. What it does leave you with, since you are still on the low budget, you know, and we do not believe in putting in, you know, glazed tiles or expensive this and these shapes. We believe in an extra cupboard in the kitchen, because, or, you know, another square metre, because these are still insufficient dwellings. But it leaves you with a north side, which has very few windows. All the dwellings at the other side, you can see them here. This is a livable wall, but it's livable on one side. We didn't want to spend money on decoration here. We wanted money to turn, which I'll show you later, fire escape balconies here into sittable balconies where you can sit in the sun with a roof over your head. You get very few windows. They are to bathrooms, they are to kitchens and staircases. They have to be double glazed, not to the bathrooms. The others have to be double glazed. This is an extra cost. Ventilation, getting air in, has to go through an acoustic trap, which it does, an extra cost. You get, in other words, a wall with just a few small holes in it, and this can be a pretty grim sort of phenomenon. And what do you do about that? Well, obviously, you can't do architecture, but you can do decoration, if you do it the right way. And the right way, I considered, was to ask for the range of the cheapest bricks there were. You know, it's these things with a bit of better clay on the surface just on. And choose the ones that have the biggest colour contrast, which is that one, charcoal, red, deep yellow, and daylight. You know, they choose the names. And then I drew this pattern, which intensifies itself at entrances and so on and so forth, and it goes around the whole lot. And not everybody likes it. Some do, some don't, but I bet they'd have hated the thing without it. And it costs very little more. You know, it is quite a lot of decoration, but the square metre of this elevation, it is not so. These are the expensive bits where you change. It is not so fantastic other than points like that. That's the entrance to Rady Street. This is a temporary chimney. We have district heating. It's probably going to be a refuse burning plant, and we've got a temporary boiler in that part. Here we have, again, our entrance points with roofs over, and, you know, non-social behaviour. This is common in all situations and all races. We've done this in different places, and there's always somebody who says, oh, this is a lovely parking place, and blocks it for everybody else coming. Right. Well then, generally speaking, these are the bits which are built and moved into. We have got, these are planned and out and tendering. We're having, as every time, trouble, but we're always having luck. Our quantity surveyors say we have a little man up there. We must have so. This one, you know, is the kind of thing one should not be able to build for yardstick. And we got yardstick and quite a bit below the 10% tolerance. Because, amongst other things, when we went out to tender, 2 days before that, the yardstick went up. And you know, you have to come in the beginning stage, where they've compensated for the inflation that's coming but hasn't come yet. And then you have to be in the right density and everything. You know, it's a very complicated operation, but you can learn it. I can't, but Vernon can. And then we try to give different character in all these parts, you know, the hilltop village. This is on the slope, this is on the flat, you know, courts. You recognize a bit of the Byker, the Brook, the Swedish scheme I showed you, and so on and so forth. And then we go on with different parts down here, and we're going to introduce more of this character down in this part. We have problems as well that Lower Byker is not looked upon as being as favourable as Upper Byker, and they're right. You know, up there, you're up the hill, you're away from the fog on the river, you've got the view and everything. We're inducing larger recreation spaces, we're getting a shopping centre down here and so on and so forth to try and adjust the equation. This is the pilot scheme. As we get back, and shortly this is all planned, shortly we'll build a building here, then we will pick up and improve the pilot scheme. If necessary, we'll build it into the finance of this part, because they nonetheless have contributed to these as well, so it might be considered just. Okay, off we go. Well, what has happened? This is the end of it. Oh, well, here are some elderly people and some young people sitting in the pilot scheme, and this is our office, which we're now extending, and this is a balloon which has been painted on. Of course, I happen, for some reason, I don't know myself, to draw balloons on the drawings I do myself. And the RAB, they tell me, has been after us for advertising. Next. This is rather sad. Well, no. Have you changed? What? I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. That's probably what's happened. They've been put in backwards. Ha ha! You're right, that's even the wrong way round, but that doesn't matter. No, that one was okay, I think. Yep, it was. That was clever of you. This actually is the other way round, but it does not matter a bit. Before the odd ones came in, we were on the outside of the Byker wall, weren't we? Here, we had something there, I've forgotten what it was. This is still the outside of the Byker wall. It's a better photo as far as colour is concerned. These become the characteristics of the pattern are sheer ad hocery. They suddenly ran out of that colour of brick and had to go on building. But it still works. Now these slopes, these are actually, if you turn it the other way around, turn to the west. And at some point, we started by just doing them as sheet metal, you know, roofing. It's this blue roofing. We're using different colours. Of course, it's a roofscape when you see it from the top. We suddenly realized that these were one of the lovely places to live, so we started putting balconies and windows on it, which started popping here. These are lift machinery. And then another thing, of course, if you have a wall